The sun was sinking low behind the distant ridges, throwing long shadows across the prairie grass. The wind blew dry and tired, like it too had been through a hard season. Dust clung to Clara's skirts, her boots, her lashes. She walked with one child in her arms, a baby barely 6 months old in another, Caleb clinging to the hem of her dress. Silent and wide-eyed Dot, it had taken them 2 full days to reach the ranch on foot after their mule collapsed outside Abilene. Clara hadn't expected the journey to be easy. She just hoped it wouldn't break them. Every step felt heavier, not from exhaustion but from fear. What if the Baron turned them away? As they reached the front gate, Caleb looked up at her, his voice barely a whisper. "Mama." "Is this the place?" Clara nodded. Her lips were cracked, her face sunburnt, but her resolve hadn't wavered. "Yes, baby." This is it. The ranch loomed ahead bigger than she'd imagined. Acres of land spread in every direction, dotted with fencing, barns, and horses that glanced up at their approach. The main house was 2 stories tall, dark wood with stone pillars, and silent. There was no sign of life. Not even a dog barked as they stepped closer. Clara had never met Baron Everett Mallory in person, but her late husband had spoken of him like a brother, said he was a good man, though quiet, said he owed him his life, but men change, and debts fade when years pass. Still, she had nowhere else to go. She reached the steps of the porch, swallowed the lump in her throat, and knocked. Nothing. She knocked again, this time firmer. The baby stirred against her chest with a soft whimper. Caleb clutched her tighter. Finally, footsteps, slow, measured. A heavy latch turned. The door opened. There he stood. The Baron. He wasn't what she expected. His face was lined but still. Strong, his jaw grizzled with a week's worth of silvered stubble. His clothes were clean but plain. A simple vest over a faded shirt. His eyes were hollow, like someone who'd seen war and never left the battlefield in his mind. He looked at her, then down at Caleb, then the baby. He didn't speak. "I'm Clara Jensen," she said quietly, her voice hoarse from dust and grief. "My husband, William, he passed a month ago." The Baron's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "He told me, if things ever got bad, to come here. That you'd—" Her voice broke just for a second. She caught herself and steadied. "That you might help." Still no answer. Caleb shrank behind her leg. Clara's shoulders sagged a little under the weight of silence. She felt foolish. She turned slightly. "Come on, Caleb, You look tired," the Baron said, his voice deep, dry like winter wood. She stopped. "There's a room upstairs, right side. You'll find clean water and blankets. Your boy can sleep there with you." She turned back slowly, unsure she'd heard right. Thank you, sir, truly." He nodded once, then glanced again at Caleb. "You hungry?" "Son?" Caleb blinked, unsure whether to speak. The Baron stepped aside, pushing the door open wide. "Come inside. You're home." Those 3 words hit Clara harder than she could have imagined. She stepped over the threshold with trembling legs. The baby stirred in her arms, settling again. Caleb looked up at the tall, strange man and gave the smallest, shyest smile. The inside of the house was cool and dim. Clean, but quiet, too quiet. Like no one had lived in it, not really, for a long while. A woman's touch hadn't been here in years. He showed them the way upstairs without saying another word. At the top of the landing, he pointed to the door. "On the right," then paused. "My wife used to keep that room ready for guests. She liked company." Clara turned to him, her heart aching with understanding. "I'll earn our keep, sir," she said. "We won't be a burden." But the Baron shook his head once. "No one who knocks with dust on their boots and children in their arms is ever a burden in my house." Then, without another word, he turned and walked back down the stairs. His footsteps soft and steady. Clara stood in the doorway of the room, the golden light from the window falling gently across the bed. Clean linens, a pitcher of water, a basin, a small cradle, covered in muslin. She let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe. Not saved, but safe. And for tonight. That was enough. Baron Everett Mallory stood at the edge of the porch long after the woman and her children had gone inside. The sun had fully disappeared now, leaving only the purples and deep blues of twilight across his land. A whip poor Will called from the tree line. The horses in the south pasture shifted restlessly in their pens. But inside him there was only stillness, and old, cold stillness that had ruled his life for years. He hadn't expected anyone to come knocking. No, one ever did anymore. Not since the fire. He walked slowly back into the house, the wooden boards groaning under his boots. As he passed the parlor, he glanced at the cold fireplace. Dust still lined the corners. The piano sat untouched in the far corner, one of the keys broken from a long-ago accident. His late wife, Martha, used to play that piano every evening. Before supper, she'd hum songs while their son Daniel laughed and ran in circles on the rug. That laughter had once made this house a home, but that was before the sickness took hold, before the coughing, the fevers, the fear, before the fire that took them both. He had buried them beneath the oak tree in the back pasture, just two graves. Side by side, with simple stones he carved himself. After that, he'd stopped talking much, to the ranch hands, to the neighbors, even to himself. The ranch kept running out of obligation, not desire. He paid his men on time, kept the cattle fed, mended fences. But inside, he'd been long gone, until that woman Clara and her children appeared at his door. He hadn't recognized her. Not at first, but the name Jensen stuck. William Jensen. Now that brought a memory, a good one, tucked deep in the past. A young cowboy with a loud laugh and quicker hands than most. They rode together once on a cattle run down near Del Rio, back when Everett still drank and played cards. William had pulled him from a flood when Everett's horse lost footing crossing the Pecos. "I owe you one," Everett had told him, soaked to the bone, coughing up water. William had grinned, slapped his back, and said, "Then buy me a whiskey or save it for when it really counts." He never did repay that debt. Until tonight. Upstairs he heard faint footsteps. The baby fussed once, then went quiet. He imagined Clara folding blankets, wiping dust from the cradle. The boy, Caleb, would be watching her with big, uncertain eyes. Children always sensed when life was unstable, but they also bounced back quicker than grown-ups. Maybe quicker than he ever had. He sat down in his worn leather chair near the fire that hadn't been lit in weeks. Reached for the matches. For once, the spark came easy. He watched the flames catch and curl, licking the dry logs. He hadn't meant to say, "You're home." The words had just come out uninvited but honest. Maybe because, in some strange way, the house had felt less empty the second those children stepped inside. Maybe because he wasn't meant to be alone forever. Still, he didn't know what would happen next. He had offered them one night, one room, but in his heart he knew it wasn't just a gesture. It was a turning point. The door to the hallway creaked gently. Everett turned to see a small figure standing there, Caleb, in an oversized nightshirt that likely belonged to his own son long ago. The boy was barefoot, rubbing one eye. "Sir?" Caleb asked, hesitant. Everett straightened in his chair. "You should be asleep." "I will." The boy paused. "But Mama said to say thank you for the blankets and the bed." Everett nodded. "You're welcome, son." Caleb lingered. "Do you got any horses?" A slow smile, barely more. Then a shadow tugged at the corner of Everett's mouth. "Plenty. Can I see him tomorrow? If your mama says it's all right." The boy grinned. "She will. She said ranches are where strong boys grow up." Everett felt something shift in his chest, something quiet, something old. He nodded again. "That's true enough. Good night, sir." "Good night, Caleb." The boy padded softly back upstairs, and the house grew quiet once more. But this time, it wasn't the same kind of quiet. Not the heavy, aching silence he'd grown used to. This was gentler, warmer. Everett stared into the fire, feeling its heat on his face, listening to the faint sounds of breathing overhead. Maybe, just maybe, this was what that old dad had really meant. Clara woke before the sun. The baby, nestled beside her in the cradle, stirred quietly. Caleb was still asleep, his small limbs tangled in the clean quilts. She sat on the edge of the bed and let the early silence wash over her, a silence that felt both peaceful and strange. The room was too nice, too quiet, too untouched. She stood, gently pulling the curtains aside. Morning was still just a gray promise on the horizon, mist curling along the fence lines and creeping through the grass like ghosts with nowhere to go. Somewhere beyond the hills, a rooster crowed. She hadn't lived in a house like this before. Not even close. The Jensens had moved from one dusty shack to another, always chasing opportunity. Her William had meant, well, always chasing work, always dreaming big. But they never stayed in one place long enough to build anything permanent. This place was different, still, heavy with memory. She could feel it in the walls, in the framed photographs covered in a light film of dust, in the piano in the parlor that hadn't been played in years. After dressing quietly, she made her way downstairs. The house creaked like it had grown stiff from disuse. Every hallway was dim. The furniture, though clean, was stiff and formal. A tall clock ticked from the entryway, its chime long since silenced. And everywhere, on side tables, on mantels, tucked in corners, were little signs of a life that had been paused mid-sentence. A shawl draped over a chair. A faded book open on a table, as if its reader meant to return. Clara found the kitchen empty, not a soul in sight. She rolled up her sleeves. If nothing else, she could cook. And she'd be damned if she let her children eat dry biscuits and old beans another morning. She found flour, some eggs, butter, even a little salt. Whoever maintained the pantry did so out of habit, not need. Before long, the smell of frying batter and warm bread began to drift through the house. "Smells like morning," said a quiet voice from the doorway. Clara turned, wiping her hands on her apron. Baron Everett stood there, leaning against the doorframe, one brow slightly raised. He looked more relaxed this morning, though his posture still held that soldier-like stillness. In the morning light, his gray eyes looked less like stone and more like river rock, worn down but smooth. "I hope you don't mind," Clara said. "My hands needed something to do." He stepped inside, nodding slowly. "This kitchen hasn't smelled like breakfast in a long time." She smiled faintly. "Well, it does now." He sat in the corner chair, the one that probably used to be his chair, the one that no one had touched since his wife passed. She noticed the way he hesitated before pulling it out, like he was asking permission from someone who no longer answered. Caleb came in a few minutes later, rubbing his eyes and lighting up when he saw the food. He climbed into the nearest chair and reached for a biscuit without waiting. "Say grace," Clara said, half teasing. Caleb froze, then mumbled something quick and half-coherent. Everett watched the exchange, a tiny flicker of amusement touching his lips. "He's a growing boy," Clara offered. "I'm lucky he remembers his manners half the time." "Reminds me of someone I used to know," Everett said softly, glancing at the empty seat beside him. Silence followed. Not awkward, but respectful. Clara placed a mug of coffee before him. "You don't have to explain?" "I wasn't going to," he said plainly, "but thank you." After breakfast, Everett led Caleb outside to see the horses, giving Clara a moment alone in the house. She wandered into the parlor, eyes falling on the dusty piano. She couldn't help herself. She lifted the lid and pressed a single key. It rang out. A little flat, but still alive. The sound echoed slightly through the room. Upstairs, the baby gave a little coo. Clara smiled and ran her hand across the top of the instrument. This house wasn't dead. It was just sleeping. Like the man who owned it. Like a seed buried deep in the winter soil, waiting for the warmth to return. And for the first time since William's passing, she felt something that wasn't fear or grief or exhaustion. She felt possibility. The day passed gently, the way only quiet days on a ranch can. Clara helped in the kitchen, washed sheets she hadn't soiled, and swept a hallway that hadn't seen footprints in years. Every creaking board, every layer of dust felt like history reaching out. She didn't mind. It gave her a rhythm, something her hands could manage while her heart tried to adjust to this strange kindness she hadn't expected. Outside, Baron Everett kept his distance, but not completely. He showed Caleb the stables, introduced him to a speckled gray gelding named Flint, even let the boy feed the horse a sliced apple. He's not as scary as he looks, Caleb had whispered later to Clara. He talks real soft, like he's forgotten how. When the sun finally dipped low, Clara bathed the baby and tucked her in the cradle again. Caleb insisted on wearing his borrowed nightshirt, his skinny legs poking out from beneath the hem as he carried his boots to the corner. "Mama," he said, climbing under the covers, "does the Baron live here all by himself?" Clara smoothed his hair back and hesitated. "Yes, I believe he does. But it's such a big house." She kissed his forehead. "Big houses don't always mean big families." He frowned, eyes drifting toward the window. "He looked sad today, even when I made him laugh a little. He's just quiet, baby. Some people carry their sadness deeper than others." Caleb thought for a moment, then asked, "Do you think he had a little boy once, like me?" Clara froze. Before she could answer, a knock came at the door. Baron Everett stood outside, a book in one hand. "May I?" he asked softly. Clara nodded, surprised. "Of course." He stepped inside slowly, glancing at the boy already nestled under the quilt. "I thought he might like a story, if that's all right with you." Caleb sat up instantly, his eyes wide. "You'll read to me?" The Baron looked down at the worn leather book in his hands. "This was my son's favorite. He never let me skip the funny voices." Clara's heart clenched, but she didn't say a word. She backed toward the door. "I'll let you boys have a moment." She left them like that, the Baron settling into the old rocking chair near the bed, his deep voice reading softly as Caleb listened intently. Propped up on one elbow. From just outside the door, Clara listened. "And the knight said, 'I may not have a sword, but I have my word, and my word will protect her.'" Caleb giggled. "That knight talks like you," Everett chuckled under his breath. "I suppose he does." Then came a pause. A longer one. Then a question so pure, so simple, Clara could barely breathe. "Sir?" Caleb asked. "Yes? Why don't you smile much?" Everett's voice didn't come right away. Clara felt her stomach twist. Then finally, the Baron answered, his voice low. "I lost someone I love very much." Caleb blinked. "Like Mama lost Daddy?" "Yes, just like that." Silence again. Then, in a tone too wise for an 8-year-old, "Mama says love doesn't go away, even when someone dies. It just changes places." Everett's throat tightened. He looked at the boy, at his serious little face, at the mess of curls on his head, at the bandaged scrape on his elbow. This child had seen too much already. And yet, he still believed in goodness. Everett swallowed. "She's right." Caleb nodded solemnly, then yawned. "Mama says you're a good man. I think you are too." Everett's eyes burned. His hand, rough and calloused, reached out instinctively and brushed a piece of hair from Caleb's forehead. Sleep now. Caleb curled into the blanket, already fading into dreams. Everett closed the book, rose quietly, and turned. Clara stood there, a tear trailing down one cheek. He didn't apologize for the emotion in his eyes. He didn't look away. He just stood there, the two of them holding that moment between them like something fragile and sacred. "Thank you," Clara whispered. "For what?" "For letting him see you." "And for letting yourself be seen." Everett nodded, then turned to leave. But just before he disappeared down the hallway, he said softly, "He's a good boy, strong, like his father." Clara watched him go, the silence folding back around them. But it wasn't the same silence anymore. It was full of something. New. Something warm, something like hope. The first raindrop fell just before dusk. Clara was hanging Caleb's shirt on the porch rail when it hit her knuckle cool, unexpected, like a touch from the sky itself. She looked up to find the horizon swallowed in thick, low clouds rolling fast over the plains. Inside the barn, Everett had been finishing the last of the feedings. Caleb was still wide-eyed from riding Flint earlier that afternoon, proudly claiming he was almost fast as the wind. But the moment the Baron stepped out and looked toward the north, his entire body went still. He knew that look in the sky. Storm. Not just a drizzle, not a summer shower. A prairie squall, dark, fast, and mean. He didn't wait. "Clara, get the children inside." She didn't ask questions, just bundled the baby tighter and reached for Caleb's hand. Everett and two of the ranch hands worked swiftly to close the barn doors, tie off the gates, and bring in the dogs. Thunder cracked somewhere behind the clouds. The wind had a bite now. By the time Clara had shuttered the windows upstairs, the storm had arrived, full force, rain pounding sideways against the glass, wind howling through the chimney. The baby cried from the unfamiliar noise, and even brave little Caleb crept closer to his mother, eyes darting every time the sky flashed. Then came the sound of something cracking loud and sharp. A tree limb somewhere close. Clara jumped. Everett appeared at the door with a lantern. Tree came down. "Behind the bunkhouse. Power's out. You all right?" Clara nodded, though her face was pale. "We're fine. Just startled. Come downstairs. Safer on the ground floor." She hesitated. "The baby. There's a couch and extra blankets. I'll keep the fire going." She nodded, gathering her little ones and following him down. The parlor had never felt so alive. The fire Everett had built earlier now roared with purpose. Blankets were spread across the floor, lanterns glowing in soft corners. Clara sat with the baby cradled against her chest, while Caleb curled up on the rug, chewing a biscuit with sleepy nerves. "Storms always this loud here?" he asked. Everett nodded, stoking the flames. "Out here, the land doesn't soften them much, but they pass quickly." Clara studied him in the flickering light. His presence was calm, like stone grounded. Caleb leaned unconsciously toward him as he spoke, as though he were a tree to shelter under. The thunder rolled again, shaking the windows. "You scared, Caleb?" Everett asked. The boy hesitated, then gave a tiny shrug. "Not really. I'm with Mama." Everett smiled, just a ghost of one, but it was there. That's a good reason not to be. They sat in comfortable silence for a time. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, something else settled. The baby cooed softly, then drifted off to sleep in Clara's arms. "Thank you," she whispered. Everett glanced over. "For what?" "For making us feel safe. For not treating us like strangers." His eyes lingered on the sleeping children. "You're not anymore." That truth hung in the air. Clara watched him closely. "It's been a long time since anyone sat with you during a storm, hasn't it?" He didn't answer right away. "Since the night I lost them." She nodded, not pressing. He met her gaze. You'd think, after all this time, I'd have grown used to the quiet. But it's louder than the thunder some nights. Clara reached for a blanket and laid it gently across Caleb's legs. Maybe, she said, voice barely above the wind. It's not the storm we're afraid of. It's the silence that comes after it. Everett looked at her then, not just as a guest or a woman passing through, but as someone who understood grief. Someone who'd met it, carried it, and kept walking. I think you're right, he said softly. She leaned her head back against the wall, the firelight casting soft shadows across her face. The baby sighed. Caleb stirred, then reached out blindly and grasped Everett's coat sleeve. Everett didn't move. Instead, he laid his large, weathered hand gently over the boy's, and for the first time in years, the Baron didn't brace himself for the storm. He let it pass, and let someone stay beside him while it did. The storm cleared by morning, leaving behind a sky so clean and blue it looked freshly scrubbed. The ranch smelled of wet earth, horses, and blooming sage. Clara stood on the porch with the baby in her arms, watching Everett and Caleb walk the pasture fence to inspect the damage. There was something new in the air, something unspoken but undeniable. A quiet bond had formed in the firelight the night before. Clara didn't name it. She didn't need to. But when Everett glanced back toward the house and caught her eye, he tipped his hat not out of politeness but connection, and she smiled. Later that morning, Everett saddled his horse. I need to head into town, he said. Post office supplies, see if the telegraph lines are down. I can ride along, Clara offered, before even thinking. He hesitated. You sure? She nodded. We're low on a few things. The baby needs more cloth. Caleb's worn through both pairs of socks. Besides, it's time I faced folks again. Everett looked at her for a long moment, then said simply, all right. They rode in silence for the first few miles. The trail into town wound through a stretch of open prairie that had once felt lonely to Everett, but with Clara beside him, it felt different. Her presence was steady, unafraid. Her hair tucked under her bonnet, her jaw set just a little tighter than usual. Town's not always kind, Everett warned gently. I know, she said. But neither is life. I'll manage. The first few glances were innocent, curious even, but as they reached the general store, the tone shifted. Everett helped Clara down from the wagon, and the minute her boots touched the boardwalk, a pair of older women across the street stopped talking mid-sentence. One turned her back. The other narrowed her eyes. Clara held her head high. Inside the store, she browsed quietly, collecting cloth, milk powder, and a few tins of beans. She kept her eyes low but ears open. She's the widow, right? Moved in with the Baron. No one's seen a wedding ring. Well, I heard he lets her sleep in the big house, and her children too. Shameless. Just imagine what Martha would think. The words cut deeper than Clara expected. She steadied herself, fingers trembling slightly as she placed her items on the counter. Behind her, she heard boots. Heavy ones. And then Everett's voice, low and firm. If you're done whispering like cowards, maybe say what you mean out loud. Silence fell in the store. You could hear a penny drop. One of the women turned, chin raised. Well, Baron, we're just surprised. That's all. About what? He asked calmly. That you'd taken a woman like her, with children, no husband. Improper. Everett stepped forward, placing a protective hand on Clara's shoulder. I gave her and those children a roof, food, and safety. I'd call that decent, not improper. The other woman sniffed. Doesn't look right, her being in your house. Everett's eyes didn't flinch. Then don't look. Clara stared at him, stunned. Not because he defended her, but because he did it without apology. As if it was the most natural thing in the world. The women huffed and left in a flutter of skirts and wounded pride. The storekeeper, A wiry, older man named Dalton finally cleared his throat. "That'll be $1.42, ma'am, and, for what it's worth, not everyone in town talks that way." Clara nodded, voice steady. "Thank you." On the ride home, neither of them said much, but just as the ranch came into view, Clara broke the silence. "You didn't have to defend me." "No," Everett replied, "but you did." "I didn't do it for show, Clara." "I know," she said. Then, after a pause, "I think you scared them. I meant to." They shared a small, surprised laugh, and just like that, the weight of the town's words fell away. Not gone entirely, but lighter, somehow, because Clara knew something now. Was no longer just a guest. She was being claimed not like property, but like someone worth standing beside, and that changed everything. That night, after Caleb was tucked into bed and the baby was fast asleep in her cradle, Clara stood by the window of her borrowed room, staring out across the moonlit prairie. The ranch was still, the only sounds the low creak of the windmill and the distant shuffle of horses in the corral. She held the letter in her hands. It was soft from being folded and unfolded 100 times. The edges worn, corners bent. William had written it the week before he died on the trail, and one of his friends, God bless him, had ridden all the way back to deliver it to her after the cattle drive ended in tragedy. She had read the letter only once, the night she buried him. It was too painful, too full of everything she'd never hear from him again. But something about today, about the gossip in town, the Baron's silent strength, the way he placed a hand on her shoulder like she belonged, urged her to read it again. She sat on the edge of the bed, the lantern casting warm light across the paper. "Clara, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home. First, I'm sorry. I wanted so badly to see you again, to hold our girl and ride the trail with Caleb on his first pony. But life doesn't always give us what we want. Second, I need you to go to him. Everett Mallory. You remember me talking about him, rode with him years ago. He saved me once when I was too stupid to know better. He's a quiet man, and I doubt he's let anyone close in years, but I trust him with my life. I'd trust him with yours too. I think he's a good man who just forgot what love looks like. And you, God, Clara, you've always known how to bring warmth where there wasn't any. If he helps you, good. If you help him, even better. And the kids deserved safety. And that ranch. It might just be the last place in the territory where a little hope still lives. Tell Caleb I love him. Kiss our daughter for me. And live, Clara. Live in a way that makes room for joy again. All my love." Will Clara let the letter fall to her lap, tears streaking silently down her face. She hadn't planned on falling into anyone's arms. She hadn't come to the ranch looking for love. She came for shelter, maybe survival. But in the days since they arrived, something had shifted. Not just around her, but within her. The way Everett watched over the children with quiet protectiveness. The way he'd stood up for her in town without hesitation. The way his house, once cold and grieving, was slowly learning to feel like a home again. She wiped her tears and folded the letter carefully, placing it back in the drawer. Then she did something unexpected. She went downstairs. Everett was in the parlor, reading by lamplight, his glasses low on his nose and a bottle of whiskey untouched beside him. He looked up when she entered, his expression unreadable but soft. "You all right?" he asked. Clara nodded. "I needed to tell you something." He set the book down. "I'm listening." She sat in the chair across from him, folding her hands in her lap. "Will left me a letter. Told me if anything happened to him, I should come here. He said he trusted you. Said you were a good man who just needed someone to believe in you." Everett's jaw clenched slightly, but he didn't look away. Clara continued. "I didn't believe him. Not really. I thought maybe you'd toss us out, or let us stay a night, then send us on our way. But you didn't," she said. Voice steady. You opened the door. You fed my children. You made them laugh. She paused. You made this place feel like we belonged. He swallowed, then leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I didn't do it for him. He sighed quietly. I did it for you, for them, because it felt right. For the first time in years, it felt like something I wanted to do, not just what was owed. Clara smiled, eyes misty again. I needed you to know what that letter said, she whispered, because I think Will saw something in you most people miss. She stood to leave, but paused at the doorway. I don't know where this goes, Everett, but I'm not scared of it. He looked up at her, that familiar guarded look softening. Around the edges. Neither am I, he said, and for the first time in years, Everett Mallory felt something crack open inside him, not pain. Not memory. Hope. 2 weeks passed, quiet and golden. The ranch, once so hushed it echoed with emptiness, now carried sounds of life. Caleb's laughter chasing chickens through the yard, the baby's squeals in Clara's arms, and sometimes even Everett's voice. He'd begun speaking more freely. Not much, but enough to share a story at supper or offer gentle guidance when Caleb asked about horses or firewood. Clara watched it unfold like a slow bloom. This quiet man beginning to live again. She found herself blooming too. One morning, she caught Everett leaning against the corral fence, watching Caleb ride a short-legged pony with the lopsided grin of a proud uncle. He looked up as she approached, and something unspoken passed between them, something calm and full of promise. You gave him that pony, Clara said softly. Everett shrugged, eyes on Caleb. Fella's gotta learn somewhere. She smiled. You're spoiling him. He's worth spoiling. It wasn't just a compliment, it was a conviction. One that made Clara's heart twist gently in her chest. That night, after supper, Caleb climbed onto Everett's lap in front of the fire and leaned back like he'd done it 100 times before. Mama says we don't have a home of our own. Yet, he said thoughtfully. Everett glanced at Clara across the room. That so? Caleb nodded. But this feels like one. Everett didn't speak, just nodded. He waited. Then, Caleb looked up at him with wide, earnest eyes. Are you going to marry my mama? The room went still. Clara's spoon froze mid-her. Her cheeks turned the color of a summer apple. Caleb, but Everett didn't laugh. He didn't scold. He just looked at the boy and asked softly, Would you want that? Caleb shrugged in that innocent way children do when asking the world to be simple. You already act like my papa. You talk to Mama nice. You let us stay. And you don't yell. Papa used to tell stories and build fires too. You're like that. Clara slowly set her spoon down, her eyes never leaving Everett's face. The Baron's voice dropped into a whisper, as if afraid to say too much too quickly. It's a big question, son, Caleb smiled. Well, I'd say yes. With that, the boy slid off Everett's lap and scampered off, clearly satisfied he had solved the problem of the century. Everett looked down at his hands for a long moment before speaking again. I didn't plan on that. I didn't either, Clara replied, her voice quiet, but steady. He looked at her then, really looked through the flicker of the firelight, through the weight of the past, through all the things they hadn't said. I can't offer you. What most men would, he said. No fine words, no fresh start. I've got scars and silence, and I may never be good with talk. Clara rose slowly from her chair, crossing the room until she was standing just in front of him. I don't need fine words, she said. I've had enough broken promises for a lifetime. What I need is real, safe, honest, and you are. Everett rose too, taller than her but somehow still gentle. I'm not asking for marriage tonight, he said softly. Not because I don't want it, but because I won't ask unless it's for keeps. Clara's eyes glistened. Then what are you asking? He reached for her hand, rough fingers wrapping around hers with a kind of reverence. I'm asking if I can stay beside you. However, you'll let me, as a guardian to your children, as someone you can lean on, and maybe, someday, as something more." Her eyes filled with tears, but not from sorrow. From the quiet, overwhelming relief of being chosen, not rescued. Of being wanted, not pitied. "You already are those things," she whispered. He nodded once. "Then let's build from there." Outside, the wind rustled the cottonwoods. Inside, the fire crackled, warm and low. Caleb's soft snores drifted from the next room. The baby sighed in her sleep. And for the first time in years, Everett Mallory made a promise, not one spoken to the dead, but to the living, one he intended to keep. Spring melted slowly into summer, and with it, the ranch began to shift, not in structure, but in soldad. The wooden fences still groaned under the weight of wind and time. The barn still leaned slightly to the west like it always had. But the silence, the heavy, aching kind that had blanketed the house for years, was gone. In its place, life, the baby, now crawling, filled the hallways with her delighted squeals as she chased dust motes and stray crumbs. Caleb had turned a deep freckled brown from long hours in the sun, learning to rope, ride, and fix a broken latch like any other ranch hand, and Clara had taken root like she'd always belonged. Her hands were busy from dawn till dusk, baking, stitching, tending the small garden she carved out near the back kitchen door. But there was light in her now. Real, lasting light. She had carved it from sorrow and stubbornness, and Everett had never seen anything so beautiful. He watched her one morning as she stood barefoot in the dew-wet grass, hanging laundry on the line. The baby babbled from the blanket nearby while Caleb chased a chicken around the coop. And Everett realized this was home, not just the house, not the land. Them. Later that week, Everett came back early from Abilene with a surprise. "Where have you been all day?" Clara asked, trying to sound stern but unable to hide her smile. He pulled the wagon around and lifted the tarp. A cradle, handmade, dark oak, smooth as river stones, and inlaid along one side the initials, W.J. Clara's breath caught. "Your daughter," Everett said softly. "And for the father who never got to rock her." She didn't speak for a moment, just reached out, trailing her fingers along the carving. "You made this?" "I did. Took all week after the cattle run. Had help shaping the base, but the carving's mine." Clara blinked fast to hold back the tears. She sleep good in this, and she know where she came from. They stood in silence, both touched by the memory of William and the small gift of honoring him. Everett placed the cradle near the hearth inside, then turned to Caleb with a grin. "Now about that saddle I promised you." Caleb's eyes lit up. "You really made me one?" "Well, it's half my size," Everett teased, "so I sure didn't make it for myself." In the weeks that followed, the ranch grew into its new rhythm. Everett and Clara shared more meals on the porch, quiet moments between chores, and warm silences filled with the soft brushing of hands, not yet spoken as lovers, but deeply connected. Nonetheless, sometimes Everett would walk with the baby on his hip, humming under his breath. Other times, Clara would find him teaching Caleb how to sand a plank or shoe a horse. He didn't smile often, but when he did, it came from deep inside, and it always found her first. One evening, the family gathered beneath the cottonwood tree behind the barn for a picnic supper. Fireflies blinked in the tall grass. The baby curled in the new cradle nearby, fast asleep. Caleb looked up at Clara, then over at Everett. "Are we ever going to move away from here?" Clara smiled. "Why would we?" "I dunno," he shrugged. "Just seems like people don't stay happy long." Everett placed a strong hand on the boy's shoulder. "Happiness doesn't live in the house, son. It lives in the people who stay when things get hard." Caleb considered that, then nodded. "Then I hope we stay forever." Everett and Clara locked eyes. "We will," Everett said. And this time, there was no hesitation in his voice. That night, as the sun dipped low and firelight flickered on the porch, Everett stood with Clara watching the children sleep. The baby curled in her cradle. Caleb sprawled across the rug, still clutching the toy horse Everett had carved. He reached for her hand. This time, she didn't flinch. She didn't need to. And together they stood, two people once broken, now whole, watching the house fill with the kind of warmth that can only come from love given freely. Day after day, not promised, not rushed, just built. Like everything worth keeping, one piece at a time. It was a Sunday afternoon when the children began calling him Papa. Number. Ceremony. No announcement. Just a quiet, natural moment that landed like a hammer to Everett's chest and mended something that had been broken far too long. They were walking back from the small country church where Clara had insisted they attend at least once a month. Caleb had worn his best shirt tucked into pants 2 sizes too big, and the baby had a bonnet tied under her chubby chin. Clara walked between them, her hand loosely brushing Everett's. A butterfly darted across the path. Caleb sprinted after it, laughing and stumbling, then turned and shouted, "Did you see that, Papa?" He hadn't meant to say it. It just came out. Like it had always been there, waiting. Everett froze. He blinked slowly, unsure if he'd imagined it. Clara glanced over, her eyes soft. She hadn't told Caleb to say it. She hadn't coached him or whispered anything. It had simply become true. Everett cleared his throat, looked down at the boy with a gentle nod, and said, "I saw it. Fast little fella, that one." Caleb grinned and ran ahead, but the name lingered. Papa. That evening, the ranch glowed in warm amber light. Baby slept soundly. Caleb was curled up in Everett's chair again, dozing with his thumb still halfway through a page of his book. Clara stirred a pot of stew in the kitchen, humming softly to herself. Everett stood in the doorway and watched her, arms crossed. He didn't speak right away, just took in the moment. She felt his eyes on her and turned. "He called me Papa," Everett finally said. Clara nodded. "Yes, I didn't ask him to." "You didn't need to." He stepped into the room slowly. "I still don't know what I'm doing most of the time." "You don't have to. You just have to keep showing up." She turned from the stove, wiping her hands on her apron. "He trusts you," she said gently. "That boy, he lost his father. But you gave him something he never expected to find again: steadiness, protection, and quiet love." Everett's voice was rough. "I wasn't sure I could ever be that for anyone again." "You already are," she whispered. "You didn't replace William, but you filled a space he left behind." She walked to him, placed her hand on his chest. "And I think maybe you filled a space in me too." He placed his hand over hers, fingers trembling slightly. "You still want to build something with me, even without the fancy words?" "I don't need fancy," she said with a smile. "I need true." A week later, they gathered under the old cottonwood tree. Just them, the children, and a local preacher Clara had known back when she was a girl. No town folk, no gossip. Just vows exchanged in plain language, with the wind rustling the tall grass and the sky painted gold behind them. Everett wore his cleanest coat. Clara wore a simple dress with a ribbon in her hair. Caleb held the baby, beaming with pride. When the preacher asked if Everett would take Clara and her children as his own, he answered without hesitation, "I already have." They didn't talk about titles much in the months that followed. But slowly, the name Papa became normal. The baby said at first, Papa, slurred and sticky, but filled with trust. Caleb said it louder now, proudly, around the ranch, in town, even at church when he tugged on Everett's sleeve to show him something in the hymn book. The name settled into Everett's soul. Like a long-lost part of himself had finally come home. One morning, While saddling Flint for a ride, Everett caught Caleb watching him with thoughtful eyes. "What's on your mind, son?" Caleb hesitated. "Do you miss your first family?" Everett froze, then nodded slowly. "I do. Does it make you sad when we call you Papa?" Everett looked down, his eyes full. "No, son, it makes me whole." In the end, Everett Mallory didn't become a different man. He remained quiet, steady, still preferred action. Over talk, but the house no longer echoed. It sang, with Clara's humming, with Caleb's laughter, with the baby squeals and tiny footsteps, and with the name spoken in love over and over again. Papa.